So this is, as Matthias said, actually the first of a series of focused topic sessions. And this one will be about built heritage, as we are discussing to establish a built heritage lab within E-RIHS. And we want to develop a vision together with you. And for this purpose, we have invited 4 distinguished speakers today. This is Costanza Miliani from JNR from Italy, from Hughes from the University of West of Scotland, Josep Grau Bove from UCL in London, and last but not least, Jan Van't Hof from the Cultural Heritage Agency of the Netherlands. But first, let me start with a short introduction. Heritage science is one central part in the conservation of built heritage. In general, of course, the preservation of built heritage is a very interdisciplinary task. And here, heritage science can provide a central role in providing knowledge for the sustainable preservation of our cultural heritage in Europe and internationally. And of course, there are many different fields and many different topics if you talk about heritage science and about built heritage preservation. And for a start and as an introduction, let me just give a few examples. For this, I will now stop the screen sharing for a minute and share another presentation. So, as I said, we want to create a common picture and a vision together with you for a built heritage lab. So there are a lot of different topics if you talk about built heritage, and also a lot of different objectives and targets that we can address. Somebody still has their microphone on. Could you please mute your microphones if you're not talking? Thank you. First of all, we have the documentation. We have historic buildings with many different layers and many different time periods that are present, and we wanted to show these. And also in order to put a focus on cultural heritage values, because these values actually give us a lobby. They help us to define why it is really important to save these monuments. And here you can see an example from the Porta Nocera necropolis in Pompeii and the summer school of international students who are looking here on how to document this tomb monument. And what they did was a survey to create a 3D model of this monument. And here you can already see details that usually are not so easy to find. So in the gap between 2 of these buildings, there's a really rich stucco relief, and also these details here of this figure help us to define why it is important to protect these monuments better in the future, and for example, to find ways of protecting them from wind and weather. Also, of course, we can use this data to map damages in 2D or in 3D. And the interesting part for me is that we can use these models for all different purposes. So we can use them also as kind of virtual data storages. So we have a lot of metadata that is connected with such a monument, and that could be stored in a kind of 3D database. And this can also make it possible then to use this for output and to access this type of data, and again to speak to the open public. A second important part from my point of view is that we can learn a lot from history. So what you see here are again 2 pictures from Pompeii. One is from around 1880, and the second one is about 135, 36 years later, a young student documenting the state of conservation of these wall surfaces. And the interesting part for us is that we do not only learn about the preservation of the historic monuments, but we can also learn something about conservation materials. These sites like Pompeii function as kind of outdoor testing sites, you could say, or as exposition laboratories. From historical photographs or documentation, we can see certain repairs and we can see how long they last, and then we can try to find out why they are so durable and try to learn for our own technology development in conservation materials. The third part that I would like to address, and this again is related very much to the question of heritage values, is the question of energy performance and conservation of heritage buildings. Today we are in a time where we are talking about CO2 neutrality in 2050, and of course we cannot make any historic buildings into a plus energy building, but we have to find ways also on how to address these topics within the built or listed monuments field. And here cultural heritage science plays a crucial role, on the one hand in defining what are the important heritage values that we want to preserve, and on the other hand also in developing solutions and models on how to preserve these important monuments in a way that is compatible with heritage preservation and that respects the original building and the original constructions. And last but not least, there's of course also the question of use, of reuse, of change of use of historic buildings. Here an example from Bavaria. This is Linderhof Palace in the Alpine Mountains, and you can see a group of visitors waiting here with wet raincoats. And the question is, how do these visitors impact on the indoor climate? And again, how does this change of indoor environment or climate impact on the surfaces of the built heritage, and how do damages evolve? So in the end, I know there are a lot of different groups within Hyperion who are working also on these questions. We want to better assess risks and to define damage processes and damage functions to better understand how damages evolve, and then of course how we can prevent them better in the future. So this was actually just to give a short introduction to our webinar, to make up the room for a discussion about vision for a Built Heritage Lab in cooperation with these many different institutions who are included in these important initiatives. And with this, I would like to conclude and hand over to my next speakers. I will go back now to the agenda slide. Okay, almost there. Our first speaker is Costanza Miliani from the National Research Council GNR in Italy, and she is director of the GNR Institute of Heritage Science. She received her master's and her PhD in chemical sciences from the University degli Studi di Perugia, and also an executive master of business administration, MBA, in management of research infrastructures from the Università degli Studi in Milano Bicocca. She's a principal investigator of regional, national, and European projects in heritage science, and Costanza, most importantly, is currently coordinator elected of the European mobile platform MoLab from Hyperion, which is providing access to non-invasive mobile diagnostic laboratories for scientists in the field of heritage science. So her talk will be about MOLAB, on-site non-invasive diagnostics and monitoring of historical built heritage. And Costanza, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you a lot, Ralf, for this nice introduction. I'm going to share my screen, and I'm sure you can see it. It is my great pleasure today to speak at this HS Academy webinar and talk about the possibility that the MOLAB platform is giving to this research area of built heritage. So MOLAB is a platform made of different facilities around Europe. And here in this slide, you can see which was the portfolio of MOLAB in the previous project, Hyperion CH. So MOLAB is typically very strong in material characterization with the possibility to have measurement on a close range. So very nearby object and very strong in analyzing the state of conservation and the material of movable objects in museum, but not only. And as you can see here from the speaker after me, Jan Van't Hof, who was principal investigator of one of the MOLAB projects in Hyperion CH, we were able already to give information for built heritage study and research. Now I'm going to present you what we have as a new facility and new equipment to better serve the community of built heritage. We have selected those facilities within E-RIHS preparatory phase. So in the view of the future E-RIHS platform, with a gap analysis, so really to better serve the community of researchers. The first type of family of new methods that can be used in this field is again for material characterization, but from a long range, remote spectroscopy and remote imaging. And this is possible thanks to the participation of Nottingham Trent University with the facility that is led by Jan. So the facility there is equipped with a full range of different spectroscopic methods that, as you can see here, can work from long distance, 30 meters, with different types of hyperspectral imaging from large areas in the visible, but also in the near infrared and SWIR in a smaller area. Those information and their more in-depth results and analyzed with point analysis, but again from working distance of about 315 meters, Raman spectroscopy, laser-induced fluorescence, or laser-induced spectrum spectroscopy. So this is a very nice set of equipment for experiment on material characterization without the need of scaffolding. That is a rather strong opportunity in the field. Here an example for this Fort Bradford in UK. And as you can see here, this is the wall, and here is the mapping of moisture, but also mapping of different types of soils as mirabilite and hematite, or mapping of mirabilite with, again, calcite of the wall. The second type of new equipment we are offering to the community is remote sensing from drone. The facility is in Italy and is led by Nicola Martini. What we are offering with these facilities of drone is different type of sensor. One sensor is a LIDAR sensor that can give to the user, to the researcher, a very high resolution model of building that cannot be accessible from the ground, as here, for example, this wonderful building in Lisbon. And from this high resolution model, we may have research and information for conservation and preservation, but why not also for virtual reality application, as it was in this case, in this project. From the same drone, we have different type of sensors. For example, RGB, photogrammetry, multispectral imaging, and also infrared thermography. It is nice the opportunity to mix different type of platforms, so to use the drone, but also to use ground thermography. And so in this case, for example, for this roof, it is possible to have the mapping of water from outside from the drone, but also from inside the building from ground thermography. The third type of family I'd like to present to in this webinar is high-resolution GPR method that allow, with the ground penetrating radar at high frequency, to have information on different type of issue. For example, characterization of constructive feature in a masonry wall, but also detection of cracks, voids, and also detection in wall painting and mosaic, and also a measure in an indirect way of the amount of water in a volume of the structure. Here, for example, for the Santa Croce facade in Italy, where there were problems of stability of the facade itself, you can see all the different measurements done with JPR at high resolution, and here some example of the results. Detachment, void in red, but most important, the presence of iron bars. These are 2D image obtained by the method, and here you can see the 3D modeling of this iron bar with also the visualization of voids that have been created and then can cause problems in the stability of the structure. So these are some examples of what MOLAB can do for the community of researchers. Other methods are in our catalog of services. It is nice as MOLAB is organized because the researchers can select according their own plan of research, according the project they would like to carry on, different type of analysis, close range, remote range, point analysis, 2D, 3D type of measurement, and all are here in the catalog. Let me conclude saying that the call for request free access that is only selected on the basis of excellence of the proposal is now open. It's the third call of E-RIHS. The deadline is 30th of November. And I would like to remember all the researchers interested in this type of methodology to contact the user help desk or the MOLAB help desk. They will help you to select the right methodology, and also they will put you in contact with the coordinator of the different facilities, so to better select the measurement and to better understand the method and the capability of our lab. That's all from my side. Thank you.
Costanza, thank you very much for this insight into MOLAB and what MOLAB can offer to our community. So I can also only very much encourage to apply for support from MOLAB for your research questions. With this, I would like to move to our next speaker, who will be John Hughes from the University of the West of Scotland. He's reader in historic built environment and a geologist by training, with research interests in materials used in historic structures, and especially the characterization of historic mortars, the development of new mortars for conservation, and the characterization of stone decay. And Marie has also researched climate change impacts on cultural heritage. He will talk to us today about the effects of fire on building stone at the Mackintosh building at the Glasgow School of Art in Scotland. The talk is a short summary of the application of non-destructive methods to the characterization of fire-damaged sandstone in the walls of this Macintosh building, following the fire of 2014. The interesting part is that this was done during the year 2016 with the support of the Hyperion MoLab, and the results will give some insight to the effects of the fire and on the conditions of the stone. So, John, thank you for being here, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for the invitation to speak today. I'll just find my screen to share here, and I'll continue with this. Yes, so I won't repeat any of the introduction there. So it says building stone here in the title, but we're specifically focusing on the characterization of fire damaged sandstone to try and understand something of the conservation state of the materials. So here is our analysis site, which is Charles Rennie Mackintosh's, what is considered to be his masterwork, the Glasgow School of Art building. He designed in the Art Nouveau style, both his exteriors and his interiors almost completely.
John, we cannot see your screen. I think you have to start screen sharing once more.
Oh, I didn't do it right. Okay, sorry. I apologize. Apologize for wasting time there. So yes, I'll recap. So our analysis site here is Charles Rennie Mackintosh's Glasgow School of Art building in the centre of Glasgow. He designed in the Art Nouveau style, both his exteriors and his interiors. These buildings and his architecture in general is very important. We're talking about cultural value here. For the city of Glasgow, this is extremely important. And the fire that damaged the building in 2014 was a very kind of emotional experience actually for the people of Glasgow. More to say about that perhaps in a little bit in a wee while. This building is a solid masonry building built of sandstone on the exterior, though that is cement rendered on the back facade, but also largely built with brick. Our particular interest area was on the west end of the building where the fire took hold, particularly the library, which is this area here on the second or third floor. I don't know actually which floor it's on. It's a double height space here, which was largely wood panelled. And this was almost entirely destroyed by the fire in 2014, except for the floor, interestingly enough, which was, this is actually the original floor that we're working on here. So an opportunity arose with the collaboration of the Glasgow School of Art. So I need to thank Liz Davidson at the Glasgow School of Art for her cooperation in this, to look at the conservation state of the materials in the library space on these stone pillars here and here, and on the surrounds of the windows. The red dots indicate areas where we were able to apply the MoLab non-destructive testing methods, which were these four different methods here. We used Fourier transform infrared spectroscopy, stimulated infrared thermography, I can never pronounce this properly, digital holographic speckle pattern interferometry, which I don't fully understand how it actually works fully, and nuclear magnetic resonance. So our emphasis was on the compositional and the physical characterization of the state of the sandstone after the fire. So I'll just run through some examples of some of the data. This is not comprehensive by any means. I could speak for an hour easily on this. So the stimulated infrared thermography stimulates heat stimulates areas of stone and looks for a response, and so we can actually detect subsurface delamination and imminent spalling in certain parts of the stone, and we can get a fairly good idea of whether or not the stone has been damaged or not. The digital speckle interferometry does something very similar, but it also measures an out-of-plane movement in the material and allows us to understand the degree of damage, again in a complementary manner to infrared thermography. Next was we looked at infrared analysis, which is compositional analysis, it's mineralogical analysis, and we're able to see evidence of changes that are probably thermally dependent in the stone. So we're looking at the transformation of kaolinite into metakaolinite at particular temperatures. This was actually detectable in certain areas. Also, there was evidence of weathering of on the stone. Bear in mind that the windows between the fire and the analysis that we performed, the windows were not present on the building for a period of 2 years. So we saw evidence of weathering through the growth of oxalates, but also there was evidence, variable evidence of the existence of gypsum incrustation and black soiling that may or may not have been present on the stone before the fire, but there was some evidence that there was some increase in gypsum formation because of the fire effects as well. And lastly is data. We have the NMR response. We have this relaxation time here, which correlates very, very neatly with height above the floor in the building. So we're able to plot a nice graph here, which has an almost straight line relationship. The height above the floor against the relaxation time. Through some experimental work we did in the lab with the similar sandstone, we were able to tie the temperature of exposure to the relaxation time, and therefore also label these points with what we think is the approximate temperature of exposure in the actual building itself. This allowed us then to actually map the temperature, it has to be said, but from a relatively unscathed area down in the bottom right hand corner to the area here at the top, which possibly reached 900 degrees centigrade, and relates very much to the visible pattern of decay that we actually see in the stone. So to conclude, and I think I've done not too badly in terms of time. Our analysis was able to document the mineralogical and physical effects, which mostly correlate to temperature variation. It seems that the damage was quite limited in the lower parts of the wall, which maybe feeds into conservation decision making. That's a good question, actually, whether or not it really did or not. We did this as a standalone scientific exercise largely. We had great cooperation from the Glasgow School of Art. And we're actually talking to them again, or have done in the past, during this year at least, because there was a subsequent second fire, unfortunately, in 2018, which was much more severe than the first fire. And if I have some access to images now of the condition of the stone, and even replaced stonework, which was very, very badly damaged in the second fire. And there's some issue as to whether or not we can actually think about doing something similar again to understand the condition of the further damaged stonework or not. So I'd just like to thank everyone at MoLab, and indeed I'd like to thank Costanza actually for our cooperation at the time, and the advice given as well, because to some extent I didn't quite know what was good to use. So I was given very nice advice from the MoLab team as to what would be appropriate. And to all of these people here for coming from quite far and wide to Glasgow in June. As you know, it's not the warmest part of Europe, so it was very good of them to come even in middle of the year. So thank you very much. That's me complete. That's a nice example, I hope, of the application of MoLab to a particular building heritage problem. Thank you.
John, thank you so much for your very interesting talk, and also for the good timekeeping. That was perfect. And I think that was a really, really good, important example of how far cultural heritage research can help in understanding damages and even influence the decision making about the restoration conservation processes. So with this, I would like to move on to our next speaker, Josep Grau Bove from University College of London, UCL, UK. And he is lecturer in science and engineering in art heritage and archaeology at the Bartlett School in London. As a heritage scientist, he's studying new technologies for preventing conservation, for transport phenomena, about transport phenomena in heritage materials and microenvironments. Data-driven approaches to analysis of large collections are also a special focus for him. And he directs the master studies in data science for cultural heritage. His talk will be about modeling the 5 layers of data in historic buildings. So, Josep, the floor is yours.
Excellent. Thank you very much for the introduction. Yes, as Ralf has said, I'm Josep from the Institute for Sustainable Heritage in University College London. I'm going to talk about 5 layers of data in historic buildings and the methods we use to model them. Obviously, a historic building has an infinite number of layers of data and information. There are not only 5, but I'm clustering it in 5, and I'll try to go at a rate of one layer per minute. So obviously there's first geometry, and we've seen already some interesting mentions of the techniques that are used to capture the geometrical information of a building. We are very interested in our research in seeing what is the level of detail that we require to answer different questions, because sometimes we don't need the highest, and if we don't need the highest, this opens the possibility to other ways of creating models. For example, creating them not through laser scanning or controlled photogrammetry, but through citizen science, by involving communities in taking the pictures and so on. So one of the things I'm really interested in is in evaluating the validity and the instances where such citizen science approaches are useful. Once you have the geometry, it's the moment to start adding information layers into it. Of course, the area that we are all very interested in is damage, but damage can be measured and assessed in a lot of different ways. Classically, you would look at the building and you would use a reference or a standardized way of giving names to the different pathologies that you observe on the surface. We have been working on creating methods that automatize this process. So, for example, we have developed methods using something called semantic segmentation. So that's a machine learning or set of machine learning algorithms that give names to recognizable areas on a pixel map. In this case, we are even able to do this with images submitted by visitors to sites. So images that are not structured, that are aligned with photogrammetry, and then we are able to recognize in these images different phenomena or different categories, different semantic categories that can even be ordered chronologically, and you can observe time series of damage. In this case, what we are seeing is a comparison of different extents of area coverage with IV, with all pictures taken by visitors. Beyond damage, the other information we are interested in is materials, which is necessary to interpret damage, obviously. And the information related to materials is extremely diverse. There's composition, but there are also maintenance schedules, there's conservation information, past repairs, and all that. We are developing methods to include this information in models of buildings. That's through a combination of BIM, which is called Building Information Modeling, but also processes such as GIS. GIS is a lot better prepared, or the GIS software, it's a lot better prepared for interactive graphical visualization of things that can be mapped into V. BIM is better prepared for mapping things on materials in 3D buildings. And the right answer to this mapping problem lies in an interaction between the two, for which a lot of technical development is necessary still, even though it's a quite well identified area that needs development. The work is still in progress in many places. Another layer that is essential is the environment, or the agents of deterioration that are airborne. And that's another area that in many buildings, it can be implemented after monitoring, but in many instances, modeling is needed to some extent, or it's extremely needed in order to obtain continuous and well-defined and high-resolution maps of the different environmental risks. So the example I'm showing here is a CFD simulation, computational fluid dynamics, of several parameters, concentration and air velocity. But the models that we have developed in the Institute for Sustainable Heritage cover a wide variety of environmental factors. So there's dust, there are mold spores, VOCs, temperature and relative humidity in buildings and in display cases and so on. So depending on the scale of the environment, there are different kinds of types of model that we can use for this layer of information. And finally, there's the behavior of the visitors, human behavior and how they interact with heritage. The example that you are seeing shows the beating heart of the city of London in Chinatown, a daily cycle of the number of tweets that are made from different locations. So we are working on the exploration of social media in medium and large geographical spaces in order to map its frequency, its location, but also the emotions experienced by visitors. That's everything from me. 5 layers in 5 minutes. If you have questions, I'd be delighted to answer them later.
Thank you, Josep. Thank you for this great presentation. Actually, true, 5 minutes, 5 layers, worked perfectly. And from my point of view, this shows how diverse our topic can be and how many different angles you can take to look at it. So yeah, really exciting work is the comment here from the audience, and I can only join that comment. So thank you, Josep. Our next and last speaker in this webinar today is Jan Van't Hof. Jan Van't Hof is from the Cultural Heritage Agency of the Netherlands, and he was trained as an art historian at Leiden University. At present, he is head of Department of Monuments and Collections at the Dutch National Heritage Board of the Cultural Heritage Agency of the Netherlands. Earlier, he was leading RCE's laboratory and one of the regional departments, and thus combining both the practical political and also the scientific questions. Jan Van't Hof is also involved in the JPI, in the Joint Programming Initiative on Cultural Heritage, and national representative in the European Research Infrastructure Heritage Science, E-RIHS. He has published on topics such as natural stone, monastic architecture, and contested heritage. And I'm sure this is a very interesting topic. It's not our topic today, unfortunately, but maybe at some other time he will also present us something about that. So Jan will present us today his ideas about buildings or building for the future. And Jan, please, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Ralf. I'm going to ask you to share my presentation shortly, because we earlier said, well, it is more convenient that it will be done centrally in this case. So thank you. And I was already thrilled by the earlier speakers, because, well, what I would want to address, building for the future. So we are building an infrastructure for the future, but we are all building at our buildings for the future. And well, my main entry will be, are we looking from the side of the questions, or are we looking for the side of the possibilities? So what does the community ask from us, and which expertise can we offer? And of course, is there a gap, or is there already a great match between them? So if I may have the next slide. So I think some years ago, there was from Hyperion and E-RIHS basically an interest in archaeology, in museums and collections, etc. But I sensed the interest in built heritage is growing, which I think is great. And in the Netherlands, we are doing also our part of it. So next year, we have our first call in the E-RIHS sector for €500,000 launching call specifically for research on monuments. So on the infrastructure of monuments. So next slide, please. So built heritage we've seen has of course a lot of strong points. It is the most visible type of heritage. You can see it everywhere, and it is also a mix of cultural importance. It is relevant for tourism, etc. Of course, housing, and it is also real estate. So we have a major assets when we are looking at built heritage. May I have the next slide? But we also have some challenges because, well, if you can see something everywhere, sometimes people take it for granted. And when we look at upkeep and resilience, etc., there are major issues, and well, built heritage being real estate, these questions need to be addressed. But we have also, when looking at heritage, and we saw already things like earthquakes or other issues, sustainability, of course. These are questions which we have to answer, but as being involved into heritage, I think we also have to answer questions or foster questions which encompass other lines of thinking: history, archaeology, archaeological building research, etc. Sorry for the mix-up. And when we are looking at built heritage, at monuments, the number of parties involved, and we already saw something about it in earlier contributions, the number of parties is really large. So can you think, of course, owners, governments, people who are giving grants, contractors, visitors, viewers from the street, etc., and they all have an opinion. But do they all have also questions about what you should do with a monument? And just to give you one idea, wall ties, for instance, are one of the parts of buildings which are being taken for granted, but wall ties are, of course, made of metal. And we are looking at metal, you can say, well, is it still sound? But you can also think, how is it used? Where does it come from, etc.? And these questions are not necessarily interesting for all the parties. So somebody interested in archaeological building research is very interested where the metal comes from, but the contractor mostly is only interested in, is it still sound? Just there I feel some kind of gap, and I will look at into that into the next slide. So please. That's also, well, actually, is the community ready? So the research on monuments, and I'm obviously not knowing everything, but we saw a lot of research into reuse of monuments, into tourism, into identity, etc. Sometimes these issues are not different from other real estate, and sometimes we do. And at the moment, and it is not that easy to address questions like these. And there we have the gap again, because the owners of monuments are so varied that we really have to think, do we want to address all users, owners, and stakeholders, or do we really have to look deeper into that? And of course, this is an opportunity for heritage care and for heritage science. I think they both will have a joint interest there. So my next slide, please. And well, there are, this is just a first overview of actions. So in my presentation, I've chosen not to focus on the content, which earlier speakers have done, but more on all kinds of actions. So we can focus on gains of the academic research for owners. For instance, that's the gap. We can also think of having an overview of the various owners and other stakeholders, other overarching organizations. Might they be encounter each other in some kind of platform? Obviously, you cannot reach all owners, but this might the platform be interesting? And I am convinced we need more databases. We are generating so much data, not only scientific data, but also data, for instance, via grants. And these often give an insight into the technical issues of buildings. So I think if we have more databases, I think we have more sound research too, and more sound research questions. And there are already linking pins between the built heritage and the collection side, for instance, via interiors, because interiors, that's where the content of the monument and the shell, the construction meet. And I think these already existing links should be elaborated more. And my next and last slide will be a very short one, because it's dealing again with natural heritage. So the first speaker started with natural stone, well, I'm specifically interested in it, so I think it is well, not apt, but it is nice for this meeting to have the last slide also on natural stone, because when you look at collections, when you are looking at literature, databases, all kinds of methods, natural stone is already developing. And I think if we join forces, another extra gain is to be reached. And I would like to conclude with this slide. Thank you for your attention.
Dear Jan, thank you very much for your presentation and bringing us back to the question, how do we really bring together all these different disciplines and our topics? And but I think that we have a really, really large potential, which you could see from the presentations we have just seen. So with this, I would like to share my screen once more finally, for a final look at look back on the talks that we heard. And I would like to thank all our speakers. First of all, Costanza, and John, and Josep, and finally Jan Van't Hof, for their interesting and inspiring talks, and for giving us these insights into what we can do with heritage science to support the preservation of our cultural heritage. And last but not least, I would like to give an outlook, a save the date, and with this hand back to Mattia.
Thank you very much, Ralf, for having so expertly moderated this webinar today. This was the 5th webinar of our Heritage Science Academy, organized by the project Hyperion Heritage Science, as well as by the European Research Infrastructure for Heritage Science. And it was pulled together by Dr. Ralf Kilian of the Fraunhofer Institution, who is also one of the task leaders in charge of engaging with communities of users of the Hyperion HS infrastructure, in this case specifically with the built heritage conservation and management community. All that remains for today is to invite everyone to attend the next webinar, webinar number 6, where similarly Professor Joan Cassar will organize another webinar, this time looking at how Hyperion HS facilities could be made useful and engage with social science and humanities researchers. So please join us on October the 12th at exactly the same time. Thank you very much.